This is the Black Information Network Daily Podcast, and I am your host, Ramses Ja. And sometimes the amount of stories that make their way to us means that we simply can't cover everything that comes our way. But from time to time, a story just stays with me, and I feel compelled to share it with you and give you my thoughts. And now, one more thing. So, on this installment of One More Thing, we are going to talk about, indeed, one more thing that is taking place beyond the story where we covered. It was a weekend recap with A.R. Shaw and myself discussing Edward Bloom and his attacks on the Fearless Fund, the fund specifically created to benefit Black women. For those that don't know, a little bit of background, there are government programs that exist to benefit minorities. However, these programs rarely make their way to, Black women. I think Black women receive less than 1% of governmental support under the umbrella of minority programs. Often the biggest beneficiaries of minority-based programs are white women. And so from where we sit, it looks like husbands giving their wives money and checking the diversity box. And we've maintained that the pursuit of equity is the pursuit of the day. Equality is one thing, equity is another, restorative justice, right? Well, my longtime collaborator, my the smarter half of my brain, Q Ward is the person that actually introduced the Fearless Fund to me, and it was something that we ended up covering on Civic Cypher. So he's joining us today because while Amir and I did discuss the recent attack on the Fearless Fund, there is an entirely different organization and effort to roll back something else that we talked about on Civic Cypher, which was the reparations program that was enacted in Evanston. So indeed, we do have one more thing to discuss. So Q, I know that this one was a big deal for you, especially because this was something you were so excited about.
There's a special type of, forgive me for pausing, but I'm trying to decide whether to use the word hate or evil for the type of people who have made it their life's work to deny those who have always been denied of not just any present leg up, but in this case, restorative. It's very difficult to try to understand the mind of a person who wakes up every day and makes the decision all over again to go after aggressively and intentionally those who are by nature weaker than they are. Those who have always had less in the way of capital, those who have always had less in the way of resources, and those who have always had less in the way of access to either of the aforementioned things. To see someone helping them, and to then go out of your way to not just stop them from receiving any type of assistance, but to make it illegal. Our very, very complicated history with this land where we live expected to show pride and loyalty to a flag and to never question, to never criticize, and to never require more of that flag in the country that it represents, unless we be told to go back to wherever we're from. Accept the treatment, accept the slights, accept the knife being taken to your dignity, your self-determination, your self-respect, your pride, your desire for heritage, your desire for prosperity, your desire for just peaceful existence. And accept that you will forever be under the thumb of those who have always stood on your back and considered themselves tall for having done so.
You know what's really interesting about this individual, this Edward Bloom person specifically, the person that went after the Freedom Fund, and he was the person behind
the Fearless Fund.
The Fearless Fund, sorry. And he's the person behind a lot of the other high-profile stories that we've covered. With the Supreme Court and affirmative action, with the heads of a lot of colleges. And the crazy thing is, this Edward Bloom individual is Jewish, which you wouldn't expect. But again, a deeply conservative man who does this under the guise, like everything that he's pursuing is legal because the Civil Rights Act prevents discrimination based on race, right? So what he's saying is that these programs that are specifically targeting Black women or other individuals to round out numbers, to shape outcomes, to provide equitable outcomes that are relative and proportional to the population, these are discriminatory because at the beginning of them, they are based on race, right? But the traditional framework, as we've established, will take all of us and put us into a group as, minorities. And then the deciders will pick from that group of minorities white women.
It's important to add that his pursuits are intellectually dishonest.
Absolutely.
Even on that premise.
Absolutely.
Right?
But
because the Fearless Fund was not something created to deny
anyone else. Yeah.
Anyone else.
Extra stuff.
And private equity specifically has always been for the benefit almost entirely of white men.
Yeah.
And that's never been called to the carpet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess what you'd have to do, what they prefer for you to do, is what they've always done: create criteria where, without saying Black women, only Black women qualify.
Right.
It's some of these topics are becoming progressively more difficult to discuss.
Sure.
Because we'd like to think that there's been progress made in the lifetime of ourselves and of our parents and of our grandparents. And we're realizing, as much as I, get on the air with you and talk about the lack of progress, watching what a lot of legislators, politicians, and litigators are trying to do to take us back to a certain point lets me see that we have made some steps forward. And they are very, very annoyed by that, or I just can't imagine. I can't remember specifically, so forgive me if I misquote this experiment that was done. The number was either 100 or 1,000. It was a very, very round number, where people were questioned or asked if they'd prefer and again, this is the spirit of what this was. If I get a semantic wrong,
I know where
or
you're
a
going with
detour
this.
wrong, please forgive me.
I know where you're going with this. Go ahead.
Would they rather be in a position where they made $50,000 and all of their colleagues made 30, or if they'd rather be in a position where they made 300,000 and all of their colleagues made 500? A very hard to process high percentage of those
the majority
people,
of the people, decided that.
and not just a slim majority. It wasn't like 51.
No, it was a lot of.
A huge majority of the people said they'd rather have the 50,000
because they wanted to feel superior.
just so they could feel superior, just so they could have more than everyone else. So
everyone else around them.
yes, the idea that this is the type of society that we've become, we've become, more critical of capitalism, ironically, as we become more informed.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny how that works. Where capitalism and the pursuit of wealth and power has now very openly corrupted our political system, where you have Supreme Court justices with lifetime appointments openly accepting gifts and bribes from private donors, expensive trips and gifts for them and their spouses and
mothers.
And shamelessly, again, the fact that what we've done in effort to make everything okay, you can't criticize anything, you can't quote unquote judge anything, you can't look down on anything, is we've removed shame. Shame used to be a very, very powerful tool, at least in the court of public opinion. Right? Once upon a time, being considered racist was something that even racist people would run from, because they understood the shame they would have to carry for being considered that vile a human being. That atmosphere no longer exists. So you have the highest court in our land in a position to shape not just federal outcomes, but affect your day-to-day life, affect your ability to make a life, to make a living, to live and be prosperous and be healthy and be safe, can just be bought. And lobbyists and money has always had an influence in Washington, D.C.
Not like now.
But now they quite frankly own it.
Yeah.
The richest men and women in the world get to make the decisions that best impact them and them only. And then they come to us for our votes to help prop up their candidates that are bought and paid for. I think one of the things that's ironic is that the reason the former president was able to win, in my opinion, was not just his masterful use of racism, hate, bigotry, misogyny to divide and conquer, but his actual true identity as not being a career politician and placating the people who just wanted something different from Washington. Only it wasn't that he was different, it's that he was open. He wasn't saying, I'm different from Washington. He was saying, hey, I'm what everyone in Washington is. I'm just saying it out loud.
Yeah.
And people have such a desire for something different that they ran to something worse.
Yeah. Dave Chappelle calls him an honest liar.
So, imagine being cut down by someone. I use that word on purpose. I'm hoping that it draws a picture in your head. And then those wounds heal. The person never acknowledged that they cut you down, never apologized, never offered you a bandage, never offered you any first aid, never offered you anything to help you heal. But now that you heal, why do we even have to talk about that? Why don't you just forget about it?
I don't know. I'm not worried about your limp.
Yeah,
You lost a lot of blood, lost a lot of weight.
But you're here. You survived it, right? You're fine. You can walk. You're looking at the person that cut you down. and you're not even asking for them to repair you. You're healed, but they won't even acknowledge it. They won't even apologize. They've never offered any aid. And then they see someone else give you a Band-Aid and they walk up and they slap it out of their hand. Don't you dare help that person.
Those Band-Aids are for all of us.
Those Band-Aids are for everyone. Not just the people that we cut down.
Yeah.
Not just the people that we harmed and bandaged. And damaged and bruised and scarred. Those are everyone's bandages. It's a slap in the face. And again, once upon a time, intelligence and empathy would rule in cases like this. Mm-hmm. No longer.
Well, watch this. If it was just Edward Bloom and the Fearless Fund, and the presidents of the colleges, and the affirmative action, and this man is at the helm of all of that. If it was just that would be more than enough, because this guy is surprisingly effective at rolling back decades and decades and decades of progress, right? But it's not just him. There are other organizations out there doing the same thing. So I'm going to share, indeed, the one more thing component of this episode, and feel free to check this out at binnews.com. Evanston's historic reparations program is facing a class action lawsuit, WTTW reports. The city had established a reparations program to address the housing discrimination and segregation in Evanston in the 1900s. The original program included distributing $25,000 to eligible Black households for home repairs, down payments, or interest or late penalties owed to the city. Officials expanded the program to dole out cash payments to Black residents to use at their discretion. However, a lawsuit alleges that the city's reparation program violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment by using, quote, race as an eligibility requirement, right? So real quick, I want to pause. We understand, and the laws are interpreted by the Supreme Court, okay? But we understand that laws are enacted often enough to protect certain people or certain facets of society, right? And if you run this up to a Supreme Court that looks at the intention of the law, the intention of why the law was created, an honest Supreme Court, I'll call them, hypothetically.
Such a thing no longer exists.
Right, but if it did, right, the Supreme Court would look at the 14th Amendment, understand why it was created, and then look at this reparations program and say, no, this is consistent with the intention of the 14th Amendment, which is to bring about a more livable America for the people who were formerly enslaved, okay? But because of our collective as a population votes, or lack thereof, we ended up with a president, former president, who bullied his way and bulldozed his way through so much of our government that we know, because we kind of have to study this guy, but not the least of which is his stacking the Supreme Court. And these people are on that court until they die. So if you did run this up to the Supreme Court, which the former guy, Edward Bloom, does, you know that the Supreme Court will not interpret it in the way that it was written. Rather, they will interpret it in the way that benefits deeply conservative, far-right leaning individuals and their ideologies. In other words, last thing I'll say, in other words, they will say, no, this says that you cannot discriminate based on race. And this program that exists to offset the harm caused by the previous discrimination based on race, in and of itself discriminates based on race. So you cannot, as you mentioned, Q, you cannot give the Band-Aid to the person who's bleeding. Either make the Band-Aid fit for everyone, or nobody gets a Band-Aid. And so I think that illustrates, why people should vote. If you want to jump in right now, it's a great time. Otherwise, I'll grab the rest of that article.
Please.
Okay, well then let me round this out, and then we'll get you to jump back in. So, all right. So, quote, in this instance, the program does not limit eligibility to people who have actually experienced discrimination. Christine Svensson, one of the attorneys representing plaintiffs from the conservative nonprofit Judicial Watch, said, she goes on to say, quote, more race-neutral means could have been utilized by the city of Evanston, insofar as they could have asked people to provide proof of housing discrimination, and they did not. So it's overly broad. Svensson added that the Supreme Court has ruled, quote, that they are not in the business of remedying societal discrimination, end quote. Justin Hansford, a Howard University law professor, pointed out the flaws in the 14th Amendment argument. Quote, the two mistakes in that thinking are, number one, the mistake of feeling that the 14th Amendment is asking that we blind ourselves to reality and pretend that racism can be addressed through colorblindness. And I think that is not the original intent of the 14th Amendment. So I think he's saying kind of what we're saying here. Sorry, I had to read that across two different screens, but yeah, there's other people that have taken up this fight. And here we have a city that says, you know what, we're going to be proactive. We're going to establish a model for bringing about economic restorative justice, because that's how you impact crime rates. That's how you impact all of the negative things, all the things that ail Black America and America as a whole. You know what I mean? That lifts us all up, is restorative justice and economic restorative justice. That's the game that we're playing. It's capitalism. There's no other way to engage, right? So in this country, there is no pursuit for, saving souls. There is no pursuit for cleaning the ocean. No, this is a pursuit for money. This is not who can create the best art or read the most books. This is a game of money. And if you have money, you can play. And if you don't have money, you can't play, right? So economic restorative justice is the order of the day. And when you have programs like the government programs created to benefit minorities and minority business owners that are overwhelmingly benefiting white women, and barely anything makes its way to Black women, you have a kind of a system that is refueling itself, a system of white supremacy that continues to refuel itself. And then you have people like this who've taken up the mantle and taking the fight away from Edward Bloom, who's still fighting his own fight. But these are like copycat individuals who are saying, listen, let's tear down all of this stuff. That money should be everybody's money. If they can't prove direct discrimination, then they don't deserve it. And of course, direct discrimination is hard to prove when white supremacist systems have been in place for years. How can I prove that redlining has affected me? I mean, I can make an argument for it, but how can I prove it? Right? And so, and then it's up to the courts to decide. And if the courts are stacked by people that feel that way, it's almost like we're fighting a losing battle. So I think this whole conversation is just a testament to how important voting is.
To that point, proving a negative is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course not.
Mm-hmm.
And there are those who would argue, who's going to pay for this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want your tax money to go toward helping your fellow citizens? And of course, it's not, the language used isn't even what I just said, because I think you'd pause for a second if the question was asked like that.
Helping fellow citizens? Yeah, it's not that.
It's not, right? So
it's helping Black people that didn't work in slavery.
Since February 2022, I think this is important to just say out loud.
Mm-hmm.
The United States has allocated $113.4 billion to help support Ukraine.
That's not even a big country.
It's not the United States, is my point.
You said everybody in China is China, everybody in Japan is Japan.
Everybody in Japan is Japanese.
But everybody in the U.S.?
Everybody in China is Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
In the U.S., if you're Black, you're almost not American. And ironically, if you're poor and white, you're almost not American either. But at least you're not Black.
At least you're white, yeah.
and at least your white point is one that some are able to live with. Yeah. That's just Ukraine. Another political tie that we have, that we've given a lot of aid to, and this is over a much longer period of time. I think as of recently, almost 300 million in aid, but since 1948, 158 billion in military aid to Israel. I don't know the numbers on what a comfortable amount of reparations would be for Black Americans, but I'd love to think, let me just do this math real quick.
158 billion sounds like a good place to at least start having
I think that 270 billion would cover it.
Oh, well, there you go.
I won't even do any more math than that. I think 270 billion would at least make it comfortable.
Yeah. I mean, we can knock that out in a good year.
And I'm sure if we did the math, it add up to significantly more than that, to be fair.
Yeah.
If you're doing the equity lost in what it would have been for our families at the end of slavery to have gotten the 40 acres, I'm sure if we do the math times just the amount of Black American free citizens then, we won't even count now with their children and their children and their children and their children, just then, I think it probably falls short on just what that land would be worth.
Yeah.
We're not going to count the not denied opportunities.
Redlining.
We're not going to count redlining. We're not going to count Jim Crow.
Lost lives. Yeah. Lost lives to the
opportunity cost,
system.
Inflation. Yeah. We won't even do all that math that you guys would do to make a case against us.
Yeah.
So,
environmental racism.
And then we're told to just shut up and accept it. If you're unhappy here, go somewhere else. And it's like, that's a very, very kind spirit for you to have towards your fellow countrymen, because their skin doesn't look like yours.
Well, now you are up to speed. That is our one more thing for the day. Please weigh in. This is an interesting conversation. We do have to figure out where to go from here. I suspect that voting is the easiest and most likely way to make an impact. This is a democracy, for better or worse, and that's how we engage in a democracy. And if you choose not to, there's more conservative justices get elected. Project 2025 gets enacted, and we all live the handmaiden's tale, and it's especially worse for Black people. And, we can change that. And you can have conversations with people that, maybe they think differently, but maybe you can change their mind by giving them some of this game. So if you got any thoughts, of course, you can share using the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. You can hit me at Ramses Ja.
I am Q Ward on whatever social media I'm on.
And we can keep having this conversation. And until we do,
peace.
This has been a production of the Black Information Network. Today's show is produced by Chris Thompson. Have some thoughts you'd like to share? Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. While you're there, be sure to hit subscribe and download all of our episodes. I am your host, Ramses Ja, on all social media. Join us tomorrow as we share our news with our voice, from our perspective, right here on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast.